In order to find meaning, find purpose in our lives, in my opinion, that meaning and that purpose comes from learning to love God, learning to love God's creation, learning to love others, and learning to love ourselves. How is it that we actually do that? I think one of the steps, and the reason that I've made this series of videos, I think one of the steps in learning to love God, creation, others, and ourselves is taking a look at what has made us who we are. So, using my own life as an example, when I look at my home life growing up, when I look at the generations that produced me and my kids and my grandkids, I see some extremely positive things, and I'm grateful for those things. I also see some negative things, and I think every family is like that. The idea that over there is a dysfunctional family and over here is a perfectly functioning family is a myth. There's a sense in which all our families are dysfunctional and all of our families have good and positive things in them. Same thing is true in cultures, different ethnic cultures. You know, you can look at the history of any nation or any ethnic group or any area of the world, and you can find within that history good things, positive things, and negative things. And it's always a mistake, I think, to emphasize just the positive and pretend the negative never happened. So, for example, the United States of America, there's some very positive founding principles: life, liberty, freedom, the opportunity, the lack of a class system, theoretically. But there's some very negative things. The slaughter of Native Americans, the stealing of their land, the enslavement of Africans, so forth. We need to learn from the negative. God is not calling us to feel guilty and ashamed, but to learn from. That's the purpose of the Holy Spirit convicting us of our sins. Not to make us feel bad. That's not God's goal. God's goal is to course correct. We're headed the wrong way, so we need to go the right way. So looking at my own family of origin, one of the things that I see is that on the negative side, I see a lot of positive, a lot of great things in both my parents, in my sister, and myself, and grandparents, extended family members, a lot of wonderful positive things in all of those folks. But I learned more, I think, perhaps, from some of the negative things. One of the negative things was what we would call enmeshment, where, in my case, my mother, who was a godly woman, was a sweet woman, was a very energetic, hardworking woman, a woman who kept things connected and had lots of friends, and overall had a long and positive life. But on the negative side, she had a deep dislike for my father that I think predates me, and may have even had me in an effort to rescue the marriage. I don't know that for sure. It's a possibility. Um, she tried very hard for very long to um, triangulate me against my father, um, to set up this situation in the home where she and I would be allied against my father. I always resisted that, even as a little boy. I don't think I ever really fell into that. I don't think I ever really encouraged that, not that I know of, anyway. But that wasn't just something that happened when I was a child. That's something that continued on all through my adult life, until I started to say until my father died. It continued after my father died. Still trying to uh, put any blame for anything negative on him, and trying to convince me to dislike him the way she disliked him and blamed him, and um, becoming offended if I did not do that. It was an ongoing struggle, and it really backfired. I mean, the more she tried to get me to turn against my father, it drove me closer to my father and further from her. Um, all children have a natural biological connection with their parents. There is a special connection between parent and child of the same sex. Um, there is, the old saying, blood is thick, thicker than water. Uh, so the efforts to disrupt simply drove me closer to him, which in turn caused me to be less able to see and to push against the negative things in his personality. Um, and of course, there are some in all of us, uh, which leads me to the next negative thing in my family of origin, which was not enmeshment, but rigid boundaries that were set up between people. Um, super individualization. I am an individual and I am separate from you. That's true and good. But I can carry that to the extreme of putting a wall around myself and not allowing you or anybody else to breach that wall. And then I become very isolated and very alone. I shut down. I don't allow myself to be open, to be honest, to be vulnerable. I don't allow people to see the real me, because in the past, when I let someone see the real me, I got smacked down. And so when that happens, you learn to isolate yourself, to try to live as much as possible without needing anyone, because love hurts. In order to love, you have to be open, you have to be vulnerable, which means that you invariably will be hurt at times. Sometimes hurt severely, hurt deeply. As, for example, when a loved one dies. If you really care about that person, if you're really connected with that person, then their death affects you on a very deep and sometimes lasting level. So, from my family of origin, I see these patterns of seeking to enmesh with somebody, to triangulate against somebody else, and also these patterns of separation. Wall off, don't share your feelings, hide who you really are, that way you won't get hurt. And those are both negative lessons. Now, why would God reveal those negative things? Not so that I can be angry at my parents or so that I can feel guilty or be full of blame or anything like that. God reveals those things so that I can then take them to Him in prayer, so that I can ask the Spirit of God who lives within me to reveal to me any tendency that I might have in my relationships to triangulate, to put all the blame over here on this person, or on the other side, to wall off, to separate. And God lovingly, graciously, slowly, as I continue to pray about that, gives me opportunities and takes us in baby steps. So just a baby step at a time, I learn to gently, gingerly open up a little bit. And I discover that I'm responded to with love. And so I open up a little bit more. And I'm responded to with love. So I open up a little bit more and I get hurt. And then God says, it's all right. I'm here. I love you. Don't close down. Continue to open up. Continue to have an open heart. And so it's an ongoing process that I'm learning. The other big thing that I have been learning recently about my extended family is that there is a direct connection between the suicide of my maternal grandfather back in roughly 1930 during the Great Depression. There's a direct connection between that and the suicide of my oldest son, Elliot, in 1986. So you have separated here by over 50 years and by 3 generations, 2 suicides within the family system. On the surface, you would look at those and not see that they could possibly be related. After all, my grandfather committed suicide when my mother was just a little girl. I never met my grandfather. My son never met my grandfather. But the problem was that the family system, the bigger picture, made strong efforts, intense efforts, to hide his suicide, to deny his suicide, to deny any kind of grief over his suicide. I'm talking about my grandfather. they did everything they could to create this myth of a perfectly happy-go-lucky, everything's okay kind of home. And they carried that on, and they applied it to the whole culture. I mean, they looked at the Confederacy and slavery as being a good thing. And they looked at suicide of my grandfather as being a good thing, and depression, the Great Depression, as being a good thing. And my grandmother being sent off to a sanitarium for a year with tuberculosis as a good thing. These were all happy days. These were good things. It was a myth. And what that myth does is it shuts down the ability to be honest. Because now part of the family system, part of the family, the underlying family dynamic is that to be loyal to this family, you have to maintain the myth. If you're open, if you're honest, if you grieve openly, if you honestly point at something and say, no, that's wrong, that's unjust, or I'm hurting, or I'm angry, if you admit to any of those things, it feels as if you're betraying the family, you're betraying the clan. And so we grow up with these family myths, and we grow up protecting those family myths. Unconsciously, we don't even know we're doing it. And that gets carried over. Now, way back in 1930, or thereabouts, I don't remember exactly, my grandfather commits suicide. It's covered up. This myth develops that everything is happy and wonderful and great. Or maybe that myth already existed and it's just applied to that particular situation. But when he committed suicide, it gave permission within the family line to see suicide as a solution. And seeing it as a solution was reinforced by the members of the family who either denied that anything had happened and lied about his death, or admitted how he died, but saw it as a good thing. This idea of there were too many mouths to feed in the Great Depression, and he was this martyr who took out one of the mouths. What does that message, even unspoken, do to the family system? It puts within the family system the idea that suicide is a viable solution, that it's an option. It's there. And that underlying message that comes from all that denial, that comes from all that insistence on creating this family myth, that myth then filters down through the generations. Until my grandfather's great-grandson also commits suicide in a very similar way. You could see that pattern repeating itself in a couple of more generations, maybe in the future, except for the fact that we, by we, I mean my wife, myself, and our children, have been determined to break that family myth. You see, these patterns are not inevitable. They can be broken. And we break that family myth by saying, no, suicide is not an option. It's not okay. It is a selfish and sinful act, not an unforgivable act, but it is a selfish and sinful act. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. It should not be seen ever as a viable solution to anything. And we are hurting, we are grieving because of the choice that Eliot made in 1986. And as we do that, we break the power of that myth that's been passed down from generation to generation, so that from here on, we can begin to create new family myths, as it were. Except that these new family myths are based in reality. They're based in the truth that God is unconditional love. Blessings to you.